but we want you to take care of yourself. Again, my name's Emiliano Diaz. I am the Men's Engagement Specialist here with TAASA. TAASA is the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. It's a mouthful, so that's why we go by TAASA. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for joining me for improving hotline access for male survivors of sexual violence. Regardless of your role, again, I want you to think about how can you apply this to the work that you're doing with victims and survivors. And so some of this may not be applicable to your job description, but we definitely want you to think about how you can support, how you can encourage your organization, your institution, around this particular service. All my contact information is there. So feel free to reach out to me by email. I know folks have been direct messaging me during the summit. If I haven't responded to you, I apologize. But I definitely would ask that you reach back out to me by email. If you are a male survivor and you want to talk and you want to connect, I'd love to meet you. And I'd love to hear more about your story and hear how I can support you in the work that you're doing. So I definitely want to encourage all of you to reach out to me if I can be of any support, encouragement, training, or technical assistance. That's what I do. And I'm so happy that you could join us again this year for the virtual summit. Also, you have my social media profile there, my handle, as they say. So you can find me across social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads. So definitely follow me there if you're curious and you want to continue to learn about engaging men around sexual violence prevention, healthy masculinity, male survivors. You can find a lot of really great content across those social media platforms. So if you're looking for information, resources, etc., definitely follow me on social media or direct message me. I also want to remind folks, if you can, or if you need to, if you can mute yourself. I really appreciate that. So you can mute yourself at the right-hand corner of your screen, or if you need any assistance with that, we can mute you. So we definitely want to encourage you to engage with us as much as possible in the chat. And then definitely, as we are moving through today's session, I will definitely invite folks that want to share their video audio with me. But I also want to remind you that this session is being recorded. And so with the intention of sharing it for folks who are unable to attend today, as well as with victim advocates and other victim service providers. So I want you to keep that in mind. If you decide to jump on audio or video during today's session, so definitely keep that in mind. Also want to encourage you, if you need any support, Tanya is in the house and Tanya is available if you need any support, one-on-one support. It's completely confidential. Tanya will be available for the remainder of the summit if you need any support. So do not hesitate to reach out to Tanya. You're like, well, I don't know. Why would I talk to Tanya? Well, Tanya is an amazing advocate and she's here to support you. She's here to support all of us. So if at any point you need any support or if you have any questions, please let our staff know and please let Tanya know if she can support you emotionally. So let's jump in. Look at all the wonderful folks who are still joining us. If you haven't already, in the chat, share your name, your title, your organization, and what brought you to today's virtual summit session. Like this particular session, I was like, I can't miss it. I don't want to miss Emiliano's session. So, yeah, why did you decide to join us today? If you want to share that in your chat, that'd be super awesome. And I may call them out. So if you're just joining us, or if you're coming back from lunch, hope you had a great lunch. Say hi in the chat. Introduce yourself, please. And again, share what brought you to today's session. Look at all the wonderful people sharing in the chat. Please say hi to them. Glad to receive more education on male survivor perspective. Some great folks. I want to be able to better help male survivors, particularly in crisis. Thank you. That's exactly what we're talking about this afternoon. I want to become a better advocate for male survivors. Thank you. I also want to start a support group for male survivors. So if that's something that you are working on or doing, reach out to Rosalind in the chat. Ways to implement more support, how to better serve male survivors. So a lot of really wonderful things. Keep on sharing. I want to capture all of that. I want to know why you're here, what you're curious about. Hopefully you walk away with some nugget of new knowledge or information. And of course, what's so unique about today's session is that I will be sharing with you for the first time this section specifically on improving hotline access for male survivors of sexual violence from our guidance document that we've been developing over the last 3 years with input from advocates, survivors, leaders, educators. So we're super excited about sharing this document. And so you're just getting a preview of the first of one of the sections of this guidance document. So we'll be sharing that with you here shortly. But look at all the amazing people. Oh my God, I can't keep up. Wow. Just scrolling. Way to go, everybody. I mean, there's 100 people in the room, 100 plus people in the room. So please continue to say hi, introduce yourself, share why you're here, how to provide better care for male survivors. I'm sorry, I'm not calling out your name because I don't want to mess up any names. Yeah. So really lots of really great stuff. Thank you for being here. If you're just joining us, say hi in the chat. First, because we haven't really talked about TAASA, let me tell you a little bit about TAASA, who we are for folks who are not from Texas, from around the country, territories, or around the world. Let me tell you a little bit about TAASA, who we are, and invite you to join us. TAASA is a statewide advocacy organization, just like our sister coalitions who are with us today from all over the country and territories. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. But we work to advocate and to address and eliminate sexual violence through public policy training, just like today, prevention work. We do amazing prevention work. I coordinate a prevention initiative called Texas Men S.P.E.A.K. So if you're curious to learn more, if you're a male identified person, you are welcome to join us for that. Even if you're outside of Texas, around the country, in territories around the world, please join us. We have our meeting next week, so there's still time to register. So I just drop that in. We also support programs that serve survivors of sexual violence. So we're a membership organization made up of individuals, organizations, institutions. And so you too can become a member of TAASA. So our staff will drop the link to become a member of TAASA. I'm a member of TAASA. We've been around for 40 years. Some of our sister coalitions have been around much longer than that, but we hope that you will consider joining us as an individual organizational or institutional member. So we provide all of these support services for free at no cost to you, including material training. We have an amazing state conference, all these other conferences. We just wrapped up a conference for law enforcement, officers. So we do all kinds of amazing training and technical assistance, but we can't do that without you and without your support. If you're a survivor, we definitely encourage you and we'd love for you to join our organization. So definitely check that out. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So I want to start by sharing a spoken word piece. Michael shared his story earlier today from the Texas Men Story Project. So thank you, Michael. I don't know if you're in the house, but thank you for sharing your story again with us. This one, some of you might have seen or heard it, but it's such a powerful piece from Kevin Cantor, who is a spoken word artist. He's also a male survivor. And so I want to share this piece, and I encourage you to follow Kevin and check out their work. But I want to share this piece just to establish sort of like understanding of the impact that sexual violence has, especially on young men in particular. And so I think it's a powerful piece. We will be sharing the link because we get that asked all the time. Where can I see it? How can I share it? I want to ask you, while you're attending today's session, to share it with your friends and your family members on your social media platforms. It's a powerful piece. Here we go.
When my rapist showed up under the People You May Know tab on Facebook, it felt like the closest to a crime scene I've ever been. That is, if I don't count the clockwork murder that I make of my own memory every time that I drive down Colfax Avenue. Still, I sit in my living room and I sift for clues. Click. I see myself caught in his teeth. He is dancing with his shirt off in a city that I've never been to. Click. He is eating sushi over a few beers with friends, and I am under his fingernails. Click. I know that alley. Click. I killed the memory of that t-shirt. Click. This is an old photograph. It's a baby picture. There's also an older man, presumably his father. They are both round and bright and still smiling. Click, he is shirtless again, and I catch my reflection in the weight room mirror. Hashtag beast mode selfie. I call him the wolf when I write about him. The wolf, so as to make him as storybook as possible. The wolf when I write about him, which is to say, when my memory escapes the murder or when the internet suggests it. Facebook informs me that we have 3 mutual friends, which is to say that he is people you may know, which is to say I am people you may know. And there are people that know and people that don't know, and people that don't know I want to know, I'm afraid to let know, and probably people that know him, that know of me, that know. The word no is a flock of sleeping sheep sitting in my mouth, and now I know the wolf's middle name. And what he listens to on Spotify, and the all too familiar company that he keeps, and he can no longer be a wolf, or the nameless grave that I dig for myself on bad days. We have 3 mutual friends on Facebook, and now it feels like they are holding the shovel. 64 people liked the shirtless gym pic, and 4 people have told me that they'd rather I said nothing. 2 police officers told me that I must give his act a name or it didn't happen, that obviously I could have fought back, which is to say, no one comes running for young boys who cry rape. When I told my brother, he also asked me why I didn't fight back. Adam, I am right now. I promise. Every day I write a poem titled Tomorrow. It is a handwritten list of the people I know that love me, and I make sure to put my own name at the top.
Just want to give you a moment to breathe. I want you to just take that in. As we've talked about, it can be difficult. So definitely, again, want to encourage you to take care of yourself, reach out for support if you need it. Want to encourage you to do that. So in the chat, a lot of folks are sharing, what's your immediate reaction to Kevin's spoken word piece, right? Like how are you feeling in your body? What do you think? So powerful. I put my own name at the top, right? Wow. So powerful. So I don't know how many of you have seen this before, and I've shared it, of course, in other trainings. So if you've attended any of my other trainings, you've seen it. Goosebumps. Speechless, so powerful, amazing. Sounds so angry, relieved at the same time, yeah. Such a strong voice, relatable. Yeah. And, Michael talked about the way that this is linked to this morning in terms of Marcus and Michael, how powerful, how important storytelling can be, right? However you tell your story, whether it's through spoken word like Kevin or Michael, or writing poetry, whatever it is that you do. I mean, so many of you shared your own stories. And again, thank you for doing that, for being so courageous to share that in the space with us. Powerful, strong, right? So there are all these things that sort of come up for us. I want to encourage you, again, if you haven't already, share this. Right now you've seen it. Share it. I definitely would include a trigger warning, but I think it's an important piece to share, to incorporate into your own training. So when we think about the summit, what Michael shared with us, what Marcus shared with us, is really about informing our practice as victim advocates, as educators, as clinicians, as sane, as folks who provide sexual assault nurse examinations, right? Like whatever our role is, whether we're a law enforcement officer, we're working in the military, we're doing community education, whatever our role is, right? It's really, I want us to think about, okay, what is Emiliano sharing with me that I can apply to my work, and especially with male identified survivors of sexual violence. So yeah, empowering, powerful. That was awesome, sharing it. Thank you. So like I said, keeping all of that in mind, what can we apply? So we have this amazing spoken word piece, but how does it apply to advocacy work? How does it apply to the work that you do, right? And again, it doesn't have to be professional. Like, I don't want us to think, okay, how do I apply this just to my professional work? But how do I also apply this to my personal work with the boys and men in my life, right? How do we ensure that our sons, our brothers, our uncles, our grandfathers, our coworkers, our classmates, that they have access to hotline services, right? That they have access to all the services that we provide. Yeah. Yes, Lynn, thank you. It can be, right? Like, I think that's really important, right? To check out the chat if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's about social media. Definitely including trigger warnings or providing resources to folks on social media when we share this kind of content, especially with male survivors. I see this, I'm triggered, I'm reminded of my own personal experience. What do I say? What do I do? Who do I tell, right? And just even in the context of the day, survivors have been sharing with us privately, right? We want to encourage you to do that. We have amazing staff here who are available if there's something you want to share, or if you're experiencing something in the chat or during today's summit. We definitely want to hear from you. So definitely encourage you to share and to provide resources for those survivors who are impacted by this kind of content, right? Like, this is all really important things to think about. Yeah, look at all the amazing, just follow the chat, keep on sharing, keep on engaging with each other. Folks, let folks know that you see them and you hear them by adding in a little emoji. It's a wonderful little thing that, or leaving a comment, or sharing some feedback. There's so many amazing comments in the chat. I want to encourage you to check it out. All right. So now that we kind of have male survivors, and of course today is about male identified survivors, this is a really unique opportunity for us here at TAASA to be able to really to center the experiences of male survivors. So for the male survivors who are with us, and for those folks who work with male survivors, thank you for being here. And we are centering you and your experiences today. And so before we get into really the nuts and bolts of hotline services, of how we can hopefully improve these services, or just our ability to communicate with male survivors, I want to just talk about some of the challenges that are faced by male survivors. Marcus spoke to this earlier. Michael spoke to some of this as well. I just want us to have sort of like a framework that helps us understand how critical these and how life-saving that hotline services can be for victims and survivors of sexual violence, right? So we know, and I think Marcus talked about it, Michael talked about it, I think Kevin talked about it in a story about the stigma of not protecting themselves. I didn't do enough. I mentioned it this morning, and the shame that comes with that, the tremendous amount of shame, of feeling like people are going to blame me, or if I tell my family members or friends, they're going to think I didn't do enough, or that I wanted it, or I enjoyed it, which are common reactions, responses from male survivors, right? It's an understandable, natural responses, right? There's a tremendous amount of confusion, shame, right? And again, it's different for different survivors. We have this ideas of around masculinity that exist within our society about people conforming to this idea. I think it was Michael who talked about, or Marcus who talked about this box, fitting into this box, acting and looking a certain way as masculine identified people, right? We don't conform to that idea, right? Because that's why we were picked on, that's why we were abused, that's why we were groomed, that's why we were targeted to be abused, because we don't conform, we don't fit into some way, physically, sexually, emotionally, we don't conform to this idea, these rigid ideas around masculinity that we have in our society. So, and that includes being perceived as a wimp, and wimp is a light word, right? It's nothing compared to the kind of words that I was called as a boy by other boys, by other men in my life, right? Some of us in this room contributed to that, right? Engaged in that kind of language around the boys and men in our lives, reinforced those ideas. And wimp is a very light word. There are all kinds of really awful words that boys and men are called when they don't conform to these ideas of masculinity, right? So one of the things that happens is male survivors are afraid that they're going to be considered less than a man by coming forward, or they're going to be called names, that they're not going to be believed, like Marcus said this morning. And part of that is rooted in this ideas of masculinity, the things that we see in the media. I shared the trailer from the Boy Scouts about the documentary on Netflix about the Boy Scouts and the abuse that occurred there. 82,000 male survivors of sexual abuse have come forward. And they're only coming forward because this collective, the number of men that are coming forward and reporting the abuse. But would they have come forward on their own without knowing that there are thousands, literally almost 100,000 men? And those are just the men that have come forward to report the abuse, right? But the fear that they're not going to be believed really prevents men from accessing services, especially hotline services, from any service, really, is their fear that we advocates, victim advocates, folks who are working with victim service organizations or institutions, clinicians, therapists, whatever our role is, law enforcement officers, we work in the military, wherever we work, whatever we do, that we're not going to believe them. And that's not because we haven't communicated that, we haven't stated that, we haven't proved that through our mission, through social media, all of those. It's because, again, society hasn't always believed them. And part of that is being denied the status of victim, right? So we don't believe that boys and men can be victim, that they can be abused. And so we deny them that status, not we, but the collective we in terms of our society, our criminal justice system, law enforcement agencies, et cetera, right? And I think it's important to acknowledge that. Have I contributed to this sense of denial? Have I denied if I have I failed to acknowledge the fact that boys and men can be victims and survivors of sexual violence? You're here, right? You're present. You're engaged. You're participating in this virtual summit. So it's huge, right? It's a huge step for us to be intentional about the kind of training that we're receiving. To be able to be present and to participate in today's virtual summit is an important step in that process of learning and sometimes unlearning, right? Unlearning these things that, because again, our society has reinforced these ideas to us as well. Sometimes boys and men are removed or asked to leave their homes. When we look at sort of the populations of boys that are homeless, that are runaways, that are on the street, that are staying in homeless shelters, et cetera, are really a result of the sexual abuse that is occurring at home, where the sexual violence is no longer safe, whether experiencing domestic violence or sexual violence. It's no longer safe at home. They're either forced out or they leave for their safety and they end up on the street. And so we just want to acknowledge that that's a reality. That's something that our organizations are seeing, that we're facing. And when we dig a little bit deeper in terms of why boys and men are on the streets or accessing unhoused services, it really is rooted in violence that's occurring at home. It was no longer safe for them, or they had to leave for whatever reason. They have no support system, right? For a lot of male survivors who are attending today's virtual summit, is really an opportunity for them to connect with other male survivors, for them to be seen and to be heard, because they feel so isolated. They feel so alone. But to be a part of this amazing community of 150 people, of advocates who care deeply about male survivors, to be a part of that, right? To be present, to witness that, to connect with you, right? To see your comments, right? I think is really, really powerful, so that that sense of isolation, we can begin to remove that, and they feel less alone. It makes perfect sense, right? We want male survivors to be a part of the summit. We want them to share their stories. We want them to learn, because they are doing the work. Like Marcus and Michael, they are connecting with other male survivors in their lives and in their communities. And sometimes they are going to other male survivors before they come to you. And part of my question for you today is why? Why is that happening? What's happening? What can we do better to ensure that male survivors come to us, especially through hotline services? So definitely want to encourage us to think about it. It's a real challenge, right? I'm here to challenge you, to inspire you, to support you, to encourage you. Male victims are far less likely to report violence. I think we understand that. That's committed against them. It's not just sexual violence, it's domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, trafficking, etc. You name it. Boys and men are not coming forward and reporting that violence or abuse. There's so much wrapped up in that. But there's so much that we can say and do as organizations, as individuals, to make it possible, to make it safer for boys and men to come forward, to report their abuse, to disclose it, to share their story, to access services, to get on this path of healing. Excuse me. Some additional challenges faced by male survivors is, those were the last ones. Were there any that were like, whoa, man, Emiliano, you're speaking like to me? Were there any specific challenges that stood out to you, and why? So if you want to share that in the chat, I'd love to hear from you. And why? Why did they stand out to you? Is it something you've encountered yourself? If it's something you're in retrospect thinking, oh, I'm part of the problem, or and that's okay, right? Like this is a safe space. We would definitely want to encourage, share and challenge each other and hold each other accountable. But anybody have anything they want to share in the chat?
So we have a good question in the chat.
Ask away.
Yeah. I always tell my son that it's okay to have feelings, that it's okay to talk about feelings and thoughts. What else can I tell him or show him that it's okay to not be macho or a certain way? Just okay to be him.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you to whoever asked that question. I think it was Crystal. Thank you, Crystal, the other Crystal. That's a great question. I'm also a parent. I'm raising a boy. I have a 14-year-old. It's hard to believe by looking at me. I have a 14-year-old, but I do. And it's tricky, right? I think the best way is to surround that boy with just really healthy models of masculinity, right? Like just really of all kinds of masculine folks, right? Whether it's stories or things on social media or books or films about different types of men, different forms of masculinities, right? Like I think, at least for me, is I want my son to see other types of men. I want to surround him with all kinds of really positive male role models, because I know I can't be everything for my son. Right. And that there are other people, whether they're his godfather or his uncle, his grandfather, like there are these just amazing men in his life that are really modeling different ways of being a boy or to be a man. And I think that's really important. Just providing those examples, sharing those stories. And it can be hard, right? We have to search for them. There's a really great Facebook group. I would encourage all of you to join it. Call to Men has a great Facebook group on healthy masculinity, and they provide so many examples. I definitely would get on their email list. They do this whole newsletter about healthy masculinities and share these stories from the news, from social media, there are all these wonderful examples that you can share with the boys and men in your life, right? That you can use to have conversations, right? Anytime, anywhere in the car, like wherever you get the attention of your son or that boy in your life, like having those conversations is so important. And it's not easy, but there's so many wonderful examples of these different forms of masculinities in the media, right? Definitely go to A Call to Men on Facebook, and they have a Facebook group called Healthy Masculinity. I think it's Healthy Manhood. So you should be able to find it there, but definitely follow A Call to Men across social media platforms, and definitely go to their website, sign up for that newsletter so that you get those emails. I mean, it's just a great collection of stories of media about healthier versions of masculinity, right? All of these things, like our conversation around healthy masculinity, like these versions of masculinity are intertwined with male survivors. Like our sense of being a man. We're not man enough. We weren't tough enough. All the things that are reinforced by society that we're told are significant challenges of us being able to come forward and share our story or to access services, specifically hotline services, because we're afraid, we believe, not because of anything our organizations have said or done. And if we have, we do need to acknowledge that and take accountability for those mistakes that we've made to ensure that male survivors are able to access our services without additional barriers, right? So there are things that we can do to improve and to acknowledge our mistakes. But I think ultimately, it's hard. Like, I want to share the link so that, thank you, Crystal. And if anybody finds it on Facebook, share the link in the chat. I mean, that'd be great. So definitely check that out. But I hope I answered the question. What do you think, Crystal?
I think so. And then I don't know if
Okay.
there's another one that you could possibly speak to. Art says, talks about feeling like masculinity being taken away and the changes are perceived to be weak or not strong enough or a wimp. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that, Art. And thank you, Art, for sharing your story earlier. Yeah, I mean, I think it's something we struggle with, all men struggle with at some point in their lives, right? I think just talk to the boys and men in your life, and they struggle with these ideas around masculinity or their identity about being man enough, right? There's a book called Man Enough. I definitely recommend checking it out. It's a phenomenal book for the boys and men in your life. But I think it's something that's either like we become even more hypersensitized to it for male survivors. That sense of masculinity, constantly proving, like the performative part, like, I'm gonna, part of growing a beard, or wearing more masculine clothes, or lowering my voice so I sound more masculine. These are all things that many survivors, many men in the room, many male identified folks struggle with, right? Like that they literally have thought about, how could I be more masculine? How can I prove my masculinity? So there are a lot of examples of that, as well as things that we cause harm to prove our masculinity. We bully, we harass, again, in front of our friends, we say and do things, we try to, there's a lot of hyper masculinity that male survivors kind of, again, to prove to prove like that they're man enough, or to protect themselves, right? So this hyper masculinity is also a trauma response of me having to like protect myself. So I'm gonna man up, I'm gonna lift weights, I'm gonna you know. So there are a lot of things that men do that's really rooted in our trauma in order to like reinforce these toxic ideas of masculinity, right? And one of like our challenge for the folks in the room and for us with the boys and men in our lives to be aware of those things and not to contribute, not to reinforce them, to acknowledge the existence of them, and to really to do work to undermine those ideas about masculinity that exist sort of within our society, because they pose significant barriers for men to come forward to access services, specifically hotline services. Whew. And thank you, Alexis, for sharing the book, Man Enough by Justin Baldoni. Phenomenal book. If you are a male identified person and you like a coffee for free, and this is only for the male identified folks because I apologize, but we have some copies of the book. And so if you like a copy of the book, please reach out to me. I apologize to all the women identified folks, or the, you know, the non-binary folks, or the other folks in between. But if you are a male identified person, I'd love to share a copy of that book with you for free. So I'm just going to say that, and I apologize to everybody else. But I encourage you to get a copy of that book. It's available in paperback now, and so definitely shareable. It's a really great read. Justin Baldoni is doing some great work. He has an amazing podcast called Man Enough. Definitely check that out. I mean, again, all of this is interlinked. It's all connected. So yeah. Thank you to everybody who's sharing in the chat, and keep on doing that. I appreciate you. I see you. So yeah. All right. That was good. Y'all are amazing. Thank you, Crystal. Are there any challenges that you've encountered that were not mentioned? So if you think about the challenges, again, that list is not exhaustive, right? Because each of our organizations, our institution, even us as advocates or hotline advocates, have encountered other challenges. So drop some in the chat, like that you've encountered that I didn't include, that you've been thinking about. Oh, the book, the Crystal, that, well, folks are thinking about that, drop it in the chat. But I think there's a great book called From a Call to Men called Dares for Boys. And it's a collection of like things that, like prompts that you can use to talk to boys about masculinities, about healthy masculinities. And so definitely check that out. If you have especially a school age boy or a middle school boy, it's definitely a phenomenal book. Justin Baldoni also wrote a book for middle school boys. So check that out. I forget the name of that book. Oh, Boys Will Be Human or something, by Justin Baldoni. So also check that out. So anyway, I have lots of resources, and holler at me if you'd like. I have a whole collection of books, both at the academic level as well as memoirs, books around research around masculinity. Again, these things are interlinked, and I love promoting these books. You know, and I've shared all of them with my son. And there's so many wonderful books to share with other boys and men in your life. So definitely holler at me if you're interested in any of that. But I don't see any comments or challenges, and that's okay. I just want you to make a note of them. I want you to think about them. And if you've contributed to any of those things. Boys will be human. Thank you, Alexis. Alexis, on point. On point. Thank you. Please, folks, show some love to our staff in the chat. Reach out to Tanya if you need any support at any time. And if you have a resource, if you have a book, if you have a podcast, share it, right? Again, I think there's an intersection between masculinity, toxic masculinity, and male survivors that I want to acknowledge. I want us to think about as we begin to get into the nuts and bolts of providing hotline services. So let's get into it, because we want to make sure that we are done before our last session. So yeah. All right. So I'm going to talk about 3 things today that are really critical to hotline services. And when I say hotline, helpline, whatever you call the ability for male survivors to reach out to your agency. we get a lot here at TAASA. We get a lot of messages from survivors on Facebook. Lots of messages. It's amazing. They leave comments, they message us, they DM us across social media platforms. So if you or your agency or your organization or institution, make sure that someone is being responsive to those in a way that feels safe and appropriate and confidential. That's something to keep in mind, because that's a significant way that folks are reaching out to us. So we're going to talk about access points. We're going to talk about fundamentals of victim advocacy training, because that's so key. And then we're going to end on accessibility practices. And so these are the three things that I hope you will take away and really think about, okay, how do I apply these things to my hotline services? And of course, you will get a sneak peek. Maybe you can't see it. You will receive a copy at the end of today's workshop of the section on this particular on hotline advocacy from our male survivor guidance document that will be coming out. The full guidance document will be coming out later this at the end of this month. So look for that, and we'll be sharing it with all of you along with the recordings from the virtual summit. So, all right, let's talk about these access points. I'm so excited about sharing this with you. I've been working on this for 3 years. So I'm excited. I'm very happy to be able to share this with you. And of course, there's so much more detail in this document that we'll be sharing with you here shortly. So first one, like we talked about today, is listening without judgment. So if a male survivor comes to you, whether it's over the phone, whether it's text message, whether email, whatever it is, that we are going to listen without judgment. What Marcus said, that first thing that he communicates is the I believe you, the power of that statement, that I believe you, and that I'm here to listen to you, right? Just the power, just the power of that is absolutely amazing. That requires some practice on our end, like listening, like active listening, making notes, being really conscious, being focused on them, because we have a lot of distractions in our work. I know I get distracted easily, as you can tell. And in our advocacy work, when we're on the phone, it's easy to get distracted by other things, to be looking at our phone, to be like making notes, to be distracted by other things in the office, by people, coming to our office to say hi. Like there's a lot of distractions. So really focusing and really listening, and ensuring that the questions that we're asking are not coming across as victim blaming, right? Being very thoughtful and intentional about the kinds of questions that we ask, and taking your time. These calls may feel very different from other calls, because for many men, when they make the decision to call a hotline, sometimes for the first time, their expectations are radically different from yours. This is something you do every day, all the time. You're taking hotline call after hotline call after hotline call during the day. Not just you, but your volunteers, other advocates in your office. So hotline can be it can be challenging. So, but take your time, really listen for understanding, and really take the time to understand the experiences of this male survivor. He may just be figuring out how to articulate his experience for the first time. This might be the first time that he tells somebody about his experiences of sexual violence or sexual abuse. So really take your time, talk slow, which is hard for me, but really listen, which I'm really good at. So really take your time, really listen, listen with empathy, understanding, guide the conversation, right? And provide them with the support that they need. And don't bombard them, but just really figure out, okay, what is it that they need? What is it that they want? Yeah. All right. See, I just got distracted there. A lot going on. There's so many of you. I get distracted easily. Use clear and consistent messages about victim services, right? What does that mean? It means that we do what we say we're gonna do in terms of our website, our materials, our services, that if we say that we provide services, then we need to provide services regardless of people's identity. regardless of their race, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their religion, their language, their immigration status, etc. We need to be really clear and consistent about the language that we provide around to male survivors through all of our communication, because male survivors are primarily going to search for us. They're going to find us online, or they're going to be connected to our organization through the Rape and Incest Network hotline, the National Sexual Violence Hotline, RAIN. And so when they come to our organization, we want to ensure that all of us are speaking with the same voice, that we're sharing the same information, that we're consistent about what our policies, what are the services that we provide. All of that is really important. We want to be crystal clear so there's no confusion amongst male survivors about the services that we provide. So all of that needs to be, we need to apply that to all of our communication that is coming out of our organization about being really clear and consistent about the services that we provide, and make sure that we are reaching male survivors, that they know that they have access to the hotline as well. Crystal and Alexis and all the other folks in the chat, like if you have any questions or comments, please shout them out at me at any time. I definitely don't want to be talking to I like talking to myself. I like I'm actually looking at myself here. And so it feels like at times I'm just talking to myself, but I know there's like 150 people in the room. So the only way that I engage with you is through chat. So holler at me in the chat. Use inclusive language and images, right? I'd like male identified folks look different, especially really acknowledging the reality of the men in your particular community. They don't all look the same. We don't have the same look. We don't have the same abilities. We may not present the same. We may not have the same color, skin color. We may be different ages, different religions, etc. Right? So I think when we're promoting our specifically hotline service or any services for male survivor, we want to be inclusive in terms of the language and images that we use. So for the purposes of this summit, as an example, we use male identified folks, right? So that's anybody that identifies with masculinity. And sometimes I use men, sometimes I use male, right? So you hear that throughout the summit. But for the purposes of the promotion, we want to acknowledge that there are all types of folks who identify with masculinity that are male identified, and we want to make sure that they feel included, that they feel seen, and that they are part of the virtual summit. Now, can we do better? Can we be more inclusive of all types of men, all types of presenters, etc.? Yes. So we still have a lot of work to do. But I think using inclusive language and images of different types of men with different abilities is really important, different ages, different socioeconomic backgrounds, using images with people with their same-sex partner. Like all those are really important examples of how to engage to determine what is our population. Do we serve a large immigrant or refugee community? So I will want to make sure that the images that we put on our site or on our social media, on our website or social media platforms includes men who look like part of that immigrant refugee community. So they are seen and they know that they can access services from our organization. So that's what that means, including inclusive images. It's not easy. It actually is very hard to find. So ask your clients, ask community members to be your models, because I will tell you, as somebody who looks for images online for trainings, presentation, many of you do, for materials, like there is what men look like is a certain model of masculinity, but we come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, wear different types of clothes. We come from different places geographically. So again, I just challenge you to think outside the box. Act like a man box. Questions, comments, drop them in the chat. You guys have been quiet. I've been talking a lot here, and it's kind of weird. Crystal? Alexis? Anybody? Is there anybody out there? It's a,
We've been
it's a-
quiet in the chat. I think people
It's
are
been
just
quiet.
thinking.
People are thinking. Good, good, good. Yeah, if you have any questions or comments, drop them in the chat. I'm just messing with y'all. Just trying to be light on my feet here. And yeah, wake us up from our slumber, our lunch slumber. I know it, I feel it. Oh yeah, for sure. We're gonna drop them in the chat here real soon. Yeah, definitely resources, so important. And again, reach out to me if you're curious about the engaging the engaging men resources. There's a whole separate list, but you can reach out to me for that. So meet male survivors where they are at. And I think Michael Gwynn incorporated that as one of his prompts. What does that mean, right? We hear this all the time. Meets people where they're at. What are you talking about? This is especially true for men. Where are the men in our communities? How do we reach them? How do we engage them? Where are they hanging out? What are they into? It requires for us to investigate and to observe and to make note of male culture in our community. And it looks different in different communities, right? So how do we reach them with our message? How do we make sure that the messaging that we're using to reach men in that particular community, whether it's soccer dads, which I am one of them, right? How do I reach soccer dads? How do I reach the Latinx community, men who are part of the Latinx community? How do I reach men who are part of the queer community, who are trans, right? Like, so how do I reach those men with sort of my messaging about hotline services? I need to go where they're at. I need to promote services, put up flyers, put up posters, share like advertising specifically that targets particular populations of men in my community, right? So this may include outreach materials, presentations, all these different ways that we try to engage the community and provide them information about the services that we provide. Because again, if I don't think that those services are for me, I'm not going to call the hotline. I'm just not. It's not the first thing that I think of, right? I think of the Rape Crisis Center as an agency, an organization that serves primarily girls and women. And if you look at your own statistics, and I encourage all of you, if you haven't already, take a look at who you're providing services to and where are the gaps, and especially with hotline services, who is calling your hotline, right? And who is not. And I promise you that boys and men are not calling your hotline. And that's where the hard look at ourselves, like, what are we doing? What do we need to do in terms of outreach? How do we meet men where they're at? How do we ensure that they feel like they are welcome here? So yeah, that's something to think about. Ooh, now y'all engaging in the chat. I like it. There we go.
So let's start with the because we get this all the time. You can't say that in a Texas small town. So how do you do this in rural communities, border communities, smaller areas?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's true for all of us, regardless of where we, if we're in Texas or outside of Texas. We're not the only conservative state. We're not the only rural state. We're not the only state that has really diverse populations, or territories. So the best thing that we could do is to ask those guys, right? To do focus groups, to do surveys, to just have conversations, to be present, to observe, to make note, to invite boys and men into our space, right? Whatever that looks like. Invite those soccer dads to take a tour of your shelter or your agency, or to, hold a fundraiser for your agency, or to volunteer. Like, these are all ways, again, that we can be intentional and thoughtful about engaging with different populations of men in our communities, right? Because when we develop relationships, when there's trust, when they have a relationship with you in your organization, they're more likely to come forward or encourage the boys and men in their lives that have been impacted by sexual violence. They say, oh, I know this organization. They do really great work. I have this great relationship with them. I've done some volunteer work. I serve on their board of directors. I've made a donation. They're more likely then to refer those boys and men in their lives to your organization. Yeah.
All right. And then can we talk about for men who have not named what happened to them as abuse or assault, like they're seeing that content they're seeing the words on our stuff, but may not feel like it relates to them because they don't have the language to describe or identify what happened to them as abuse.
Woo! Y'all just bringing it. What a great question. Yeah, I mean, for a lot of male survivors, they just don't even they don't even have the language. They don't even know how to articulate it, right? So part of our challenge is to make sure that when we talk about sexual violence, we also that we talk about this expansive. We talk about, you know, this continuum of sexual violence and sexual abuse. That our language is inclusive. That we provide definitions that are accessible to folks. That are inclusive of different people's experiences, like Michael, like Marcus, like other male survivors that are in this space in terms of their own lived experience, whether it was sexual violence that they experienced in the military or sexual violence they experienced in detention or prisons. The language, the definitions that we use need to be right. And it's going to be different for different populations of men. What I'm saying is that we need to be thoughtful and intentional about, like, maybe the definition or the language that we use with this particular group of men is not the same for this particular group of men, right? And that could be around age, that could be around race, that could be around sexual orientation or identity, et cetera, right? So, you know, figuring out what works is okay, right? You're going to make mistakes. We're going to say the wrong thing. We're not gonna reach the right people. But I think the internal work of saying, okay, what can I do better, right? And acknowledge the mistakes that we made publicly or privately with male survivors and say, you know what, I want to learn, I want to do better. What could I have done differently? Especially for men who are accessing hotline services. It's actually the second thing that's on here is asking male clients what you can do better. What can I do better, right? Where did I drop the ball? What can I improve? And it just requires that question about, like, what can I do better? And it's an acknowledgement, you're being seen, you're being heard, because again, and this is not just exclusive to male survivors. This is inclusive for all of our survivors who are accessing services, right? But when we talk about male survivors, your willingness to ask me what I think, what I, you know, like what I needed, to ask that question of Marcus and for us to listen to him and to make note of what he said about what we can do better. And I think that's really important. Any other questions or comments, Crystal? Oh, there's lots of stuff.
We have quite a few
my
coming in. I'm
goodness.
trying to filter through. Some people that can't access Google Docs and are back up for that, so we'll get that taken care of. And then there is Rebecca Fears, who says RAIN seems to be a resource that a lot of people use. So I know I have sent a few people to RAIN too that felt like they needed a different outlet. So let's see.
Yeah, I mean, RAIN is not perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, RAIN is not. We're not perfect here at TAASA. I don't think any. I mean, the whole challenge for us, and of course, do we want to help RAIN be improve and to be better? I hope if there are folks from RAIN who are volunteers or who work at RAIN, I hope you're here, and I hope that you're open, you know, and to hear that, right? That's the kind of feedback that we need to hear. That it sometimes, like we need to hear too about our services, right? Because most folks are calling the local hotline. I mean, RAIN will literally just connect them from the national hotline to your center, and so that's why you at the local center need to be ready to respond to these calls, right? That's really the role of RAIN. While they may provide immediate, direct, like, you know, information and crisis counseling over the phone, or you know, when people are in crisis, they generally will refer that person immediately to their local rape crisis center and to their 24-hour hotline. So it's us that has the heavy burden of ensuring that our response, that we're responsive to male survivors. So I appreciate that. I want to see that. I want to hear that. And yeah, I also recognize that it's 2:00 and our next presenter is at 2:45. So, and I'm halfway through this thing. We've only gotten to like some of the points. Any other questions or comments? Oh my God.
I think another big one, because they are coming in quick, but a good place to wrap up is a lot of our centers came about in the 70s and 80s and had names that specifically identified that we worked with women or children. And some of us need to update, and it's very hard to update if your community is not, or your finances and stuff aren't in a place to make that brand switch. So what can people do if their centers still have that in their name, to continue to let males know they can come in until they can get to a name change. So
Yeah, that's a great question. So I get it. It's real. It's happening here in Texas. A lot of our centers have been around for 40 years, right? And have these names that are really, it's hard to break free from that brand. Just ask any of those organizations, institutions, coalitions that have changed their name. It's a very expensive and it's a hard process, right? Like you have to then you have to do another round of brand awareness about who you are and what you provide. That's why your mission is so critical. Making that mission statement so clear, concise, like accessible, so that people can see your mission, and that your mission is inclusive of people. It doesn't, maybe you don't need to say male identified folks. You don't need to include men, girls, women, children, etc. You just say survivors of sexual violence. Right, that language is powerful, right? Just to feel like, okay, I'm a survivor. Maybe I may not call myself a survivor. Maybe I may not call myself a victim. Many boys and men don't identify with those labels. That's okay, but they know that they can access if they've had these unwanted experiences of sexual violence or sexual abuse, right? I love the language that 1 in 6 malesurvivor.org uses in terms of these unwanted sexual experiences, right? So again, it's how we frame the experiences of sexual violence and sexual abuse for men. And I'm not saying we have to bend over backwards and change our mission and do all these things, right? Like, but how can we be crystal clear? How can we communicate across, like, consistently to potential male clients in our community? So you don't have to do this alone. That's like, folks, I want to remind you that if you're here in Texas, and I love my folks from out of state and territories, but that's what I'm here to help you do, to think about these things. I mean, we like, the training and technical assistance around these issues are real. And the guidance that we're providing is not like the answer. It is part of the answer, right? This requires a tremendous amount of thinking and work with your age, from your board to your clients to your staff. We want to support you in that process. So don't fear, you don't have to do this alone. So I hope I answered that question and we can get along. Yeah. Does that help, Crystal?
yes.
Good. Let's continue. Explore alternatives to traditional phone services. Again, everybody has a phone. Folks have cell phones, they have access to phones, but there are other types of services, like I said, whether it's direct message, text messaging, all those sort of non-traditional, like in terms of generational use of the phone. Like I only text with my kid. He never calls me, right? So I don't, if you think about generational people, like in terms of the way that they use technology, and they use the phone. I don't know. I no longer have a home phone, right? So it's cordless now, right? Like, that's wild, So I think, and we have these phones that we carry everywhere with us, and people use them to text and to message. And, how many of you are actually making phone calls with your phone? So the idea of hotlines, right, of phone is probably maybe beginning to go out of sort of in terms of technology, right? So again, I want us to begin to explore that now, right? What is the alternative to talking to people on the phone? Is it this? Is it video? Like, is it through Zoom? Is it through telehealth? Is it through texting? Is it through chatting through our website? Is it like other forms, other alternatives? So I want us to explore that. And then be aware of our own biases. One of the things we've been talking about that I really encourage you is to do some really important introspective, to really think about what is it that you believe and think about men, right? Because all of us have lived experiences of boys and men, some positive, some negative, some traumatic, some violent, some abuse. Some of us are survivors of sexual violence at the hands of boys and men. So we need to acknowledge that informs our biases, what we think about other men, what we think about men of color, what we think about immigrant men. We have all of these preconceived notions, these biases that are rooted in, like, racism and oppression and sexism and like all of these things that we have all these biases. And so our job, my challenge to you is to just to be reflective, to think about, okay, why did I respond that way? Why did I think that? Why did I say that? Why did I call it, like, you know what I mean? Why did I immediately think that this man that's calling the hotline is a batterer? I did it. I did it. I did it plenty when I was a volunteer and when I was a victim advocate in a shelter. Any man that showed up, whether he was there just delivering milk, he's a batterer. Let's call the police, right? Rather than a man who is here to help, rather than a man who's here to provide a service, a man who's here to, you know, is a good guy. He's just lost. He didn't know it was a shelter, right? So these are all things that we encounter every day, and they're rooted in our biases. And those are real. Those are, it's like, we're going to have them. All of us, including me, has those biases about other boys and men. And so where do they come from? Like, how do I dismantle some of these ideas? How do I, you know, take out the roots of some of these ideas that I have? So explore that a little bit. That's my challenge for you today. And then training. We all do amazing training. That's why we're here today at the summit, right? We think that victim advocacy training is critical. It is key. For our folks here in Texas, they are required to go through a 40-hour training. It's the same training I went through when I became a volunteer and became a victim advocate. That's intense. Some states, some territories, it's much higher. The requirement is much higher. Like, you have to get a lot more training. You have to do additional training. You know, you have to be licensed in some states and territories. So victim advocacy is key. I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that I think are really important, that we want to like look at our training agendas, ensure that these are part of the training that we're providing. Well, that means that we need to provide comprehensive training and practice, right? It's not just the training, but it's the practice and using examples specifically around male survivors and hotline calls, right? Let's listen. Is there a way for us to practice maybe a transcript or listen to an actual call with the consent of the client, right? Are there ways for us to really learn and practice together and to say, oh, you know what? You could have done better. You know, especially from folks who have a lot more experience on the hotline, who making sure that they are part of that training, that they're providing that training to new volunteers, new advocates, etc. Creating a hotline advocate library. When I was coming up through when I was working as an advocate and I was answering hotline, we had access to this amazing library of materials, articles, books, resources. Like, all of this now is available digitally online. You know, it could be a website where it's all housed. There's so many amazing resources, collections of resources. But let's create a hotline advocacy library so that when I am talking to a client, I can just look for information and boom, I have a script, I have some information, I have a resource that I can share with the client, right? That library is both, can be a physical thing, and it can be something that you provide to folks online. And there's some additional guidance in the document that you can explore more. And then you know, again, I'm happy to help you think about developing. Of course, supervision is key, right? We need to supervise hotline advocates because we're going to make mistakes. I made plenty of mistakes, but the only way for me to learn is by having really strong, like, supervisors, whether they're volunteers or other staff people who are listening in, who are observing, who are listening to my responses, who are listening in on the calls, right, and providing me with feedback, right? All of this is in a confidential space, and it provides me with critical feedback that I need to be better. I want to be better. I want to be a better hotline advocate. I want to think that when I left the rape crisis center that I was working for 15 years ago, that I was at the top of my game. But that only came from like critical feedback from strong supervisors, not just around hotline advocacy, about advocacy in general, that I felt like, okay, I was slowly improving. I had to learn a lot of really hard lessons. I made a lot of mistakes. I said and did the wrong thing. That's okay. It's real. We're all going to make them. I've made 100 mistakes today, and that's okay. You guys have all seen them. So it's okay for us to acknowledge that and to try to be better. Like next year's summit, if we do this thing, it's going to be better than the last 2 years of this summit, right? I believe that. And so, but we can only do that with strong supervision. Holy moly, where has time gone? This is, if you've been to anything with me, this is how I roll. I just talk and talk and talk. What fundamental blocks are missing from your victim advocacy training? So I want you to think about your training, especially if you're a new advocate. Maybe this is your first training about male survivors. Maybe you didn't get that at your agency. That's okay. I'm glad you're here. And we want to make sure that this summit, that's why it's so important for it to be available to other victim advocates who may not have access to this type of training. That's why the recording is going to be shared with you post-summit and will be available on our YouTube channel for anyone to access at any time, to watch anywhere, because we all need to learn, right? So think about what's missing from your training and what successes have you had. So this is not about like poo-pooing on ourselves and saying, you guys are bad. You guys could do better. What are you doing that's really great? Share that in the chat. What are you guys doing that's phenomenal? What's working? What is going really well, right? Give yourself some love. Give yourself some grace. Shout out the really great things that you're doing when it comes to hotline services, because there are a lot of folks in this room who are doing it really well and that I can learn from and that we can all learn from. And so I want to encourage you to share that, because if I see that in the chat, I'm going, hey, I don't reach out to them. Find out what they're doing. I want to learn from them. Like that's really interesting. I never thought about that. So if you're doing something great, reach out to me because I want to learn and then impart that learning with other folks here in Texas and around the country and territories, right? Because people are constantly reaching out to me. What can I do? How can I be better? Like, we're doing these really great things and I'm learning all the time. So yeah. Y'all are amazing. Wow. Okay, here we go. Accessibility. This is really important. And when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about folks of all kinds of abilities, ensuring that they have access to the hotline. Period. Right? And it's something, again, we may not have thought about. It's something that we may not have the capacity to provide, but there are things that we can do that are incremental, that are baby steps to ensure that folks have access, regardless of their ability, to hotline services. So that requires for us to really take a hard look at what accessibility looks like on the hotline. What is it that we're doing well? How is it accessible and where can we improve, right? Just doing an audit, just asking yourself that question about like, these are the things that I can improve, that I have the control, the power to improve, don't require a lot of resources, but are definitely a deficit within our hotline services. Seek input from disabled survivors, all kinds of able-bodied survivors, right? What can we do better? Like, what is it about our services that you weren't able to access? What is it that just asking male survivors that are all kinds of different abilities, asking them what we can do better, how they can access the hotline. Again, hotline is a phone communication. It's my ability to vocalize, to speak, and not all boys and men are able to do that. They don't have that ability. They're not able to communicate. They may not have access to a phone. They may not be able to speak. So how do we ensure that male survivors are able to access our services through text and other electronic forms of communication, right? So that we're, again, fully accessible and that we're complying with the American Disabilities Act, or like the services that we are required by state law and federal law to provide to persons of different abilities. Train hotline advocates on how to use that assistive technology, right? It's called assistive technology. And I think that's exactly what it is. And a lot of us don't know how to use it. What is it? What are you talking about, Emiliano? In the guidance document, there's some specific examples of what assistive technology looks like and the things that I need to learn how to use. And that we collectively need to learn how to use and need to have on hand within our agencies to ensure that anyone can access hotline services. And not just hotline services, but services overall. Like, we're going to do an accessibility audit on all of our services, but I want us to really focus on improving the things around hotline and making sure that they are accessible with technology. And then recruiting and training multilingual staff and volunteers, right? Who are the folks in your community? What languages do they speak? And ensuring that we have volunteers and staff, or we have access to those language services, right? Whether it's American Sign Language or other languages that folks in your community speak, that we have interpreters who are volunteers or staff, that we have bilingual individuals that are available on hotline 24/7, or if we don't, that we have access to those interpretation services to ensure that people can access the information and that we can understand them fully, right? Because we want to ensure that any man, again, regardless of their race, their immigration status, their language, their ability, we want them to be able to access our services. Compile and update available interpretation services. Those are constantly changing in our community. Services are coming, they're going. So make sure that you have the most recent updated information about those services that are available in your community, right? Some are free, some have a cost. There are organizations that provide services, that provide assistance to folks with all kinds of abilities. So partnering with them, collaborating with them, ensuring that they have access and that they have training to make sure that your clients feel that safe and that what they're sharing is confidential, right? These are all things that we should think about. Outreach to diverse communities. So when I say diverse communities, in terms of all kinds of ability communities, right? People, all kinds of communities. And again, we're talking about that entire spectrum of abilities. So am I doing outreach? Am I reaching folks in those communities? Are we partnering with those organizations, institutions that are serving people who are part of those communities, right? Are we ensuring that they have access, that they know our services are for them? SAFE has an amazing ability services here in Austin. They have a whole department that's really focused on outreach and education and providing services to different able-bodied or different-bodied people. And again, we may not get the language right. I always don't get the language right, but I think part of what we are trying to do is just to be thoughtful and to be intentional and to learn. And so if I can be better, let me know. And there are folks in the room who have a lot more experience than I do. I want to acknowledge that, and who have worked with these communities and who want to ensure that male survivors from these communities have access to the hotline and to our services. So, because time is coming to an end, and I've talked my heart out, and I am toast. I am toasty, y'all. That's why I'm glad I'm not presenting this next block. So it's real for those of you who do training. And so I want you to think about how you or your organization has improved accessibility, right, to hotline services for male identified survivors. If you have experience in this area, let us know. Drop it in the chat. What are you doing really well? What have you thought about that I haven't mentioned that's not included in the document? I want to hear from you. And what additional support do you need in order to be successful? How can I support you? How can I encourage you? So please let me know. I want to be a resource for everybody who is here in the summit. This is just guidance. This is a guidance document. It just it requires for you to do. That's all it is. 3 years worth of writing. It's now time for you to do it, right? For you to apply some of these lessons and some of the research that we've learned from, and the guidance that we've received from advocates and victim providers around the country and territories. It's up to you to apply these things to your hotline services. I can't do it for you. I wish I could. I wish I had a magic wand. Oh, we're all better today. We're all doing it great. And every man that needs support can call a hotline, and there's going to be a person ready to support him, regardless of who he is or what he needs, right? That's just, I wish I had that magic wand, but I don't. But you do. You have a tremendous amount of power and control in terms of your own advocacy work, your own organization. You can invite me to come and provide additional training or provide technical assistance to your staff or your volunteers. So I want you to know that you don't have to do this alone. Woo! Woo! Here's some really great resources. They're going to drop a link to the resources if they haven't already. There's as part of the guidance document, there's a collection of resources specifically around engaging male survivors. And these are all included in them. These 3 documentaries are amazing. I think I've mentioned Scouts Honor today, Boys and Men Healing, the Voiceless Connection, specifically from our sister coalition in Washington State that developed a guidance document around male survivors of sexual violence. Check that out. The No More campaign, the One Blue String campaign, the resources on the Go podcast from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Tune in if you love podcasts as much as I do. We did a whole series, and I contributed to it, around male survivors of sexual violence. So go and check out all of the podcasts related to this issue. It's a great resource if you're doing prevention, education, outreach, victim services, whatever you're doing, it's a great resource. And then, of course, check out the Good Men Project. There's a lot of writing from male survivors, lots of really cool blog posts there. I am running out of time, as you can tell. And then, of course, Just Detention for folks who are working with individuals who are detained, incarcerated, in prison, who are doing PREA work with male survivors. Just Detention offers a lot of really great information, training, and legal information services for survivors. The No More campaign, hopefully all of you are familiar with it. It's a phenomenal campaign that includes some messaging around male survivors. Check it out. It's a great way to, and they just have a lot of really wonderful material. And of course, the No More brand that you can use. Of course, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, VAWA.net, SNAP, the organization for individuals that were abused by priests, and then Forge, who provides training and technical assistance related to sexual violence in trans communities. So they've done some phenomenal work around working with trans men, and so non-binary, masculine identified folks. So Forge is an amazing organization. Shout out to anybody here from Forge, but definitely check out their organization. Follow them on all these organizations on social media, access their information. All of that's included in a link that's being shared with you. And then the three primary organizations in this country that provides information, services, resources for male identified survivors. Malesurvivor.org provides services and information to loved ones, to family members, friends, clinicians, etc. Men Healing is a phenomenal organization that provides a lot of therapy. They do these healing retreats for male survivors. They're starting a online support group for male survivors. They're doing some phenomenal work. Don't take my word for it. Check them out. Follow them on social media. Support, volunteer, donate. And then, of course, 1 in 6, which is specifically around childhood sexual abuse. So they do a online support group for male survivors of childhood sexual abuse. So definitely encourage your clients to check that out if you're not able to provide support group to male survivors. But all of these resources are intended for you to share on your hotline with callers, with Men Online. So definitely want to encourage you to do that. And then I'm going to leave you with this question, this challenge. This is my challenge for you. Is what are your next steps, right? What is the thing that you are committed to that, Emiliano, wow, I can't believe you said that. I feel seen. I feel heard. This is something I've been thinking about. This is something I want to work on. What is that one thing that you're going to work on today to improve your hotline services to male survivors of sexual violence? What are you going to do? What are you going to work to improve? Just make a note of it. Put it on a Post-it. You can share it in the chat if you want. But I want to encourage you to commit to something. I'm going to share the section. Right now you have it. It's a PDF. So I can download it as a PDF and share it with all my coworkers. I can incorporate it into our volunteer training. Of course, it'll look really nice real soon. It'll be in a TAASA template and it'll be really great. It'll be TAASA branded and you'll be able to share the whole document. But this particular section can be really helpful. I'm really open to any feedback that you have about it. I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have. And if you've taken something from it that you're trying to apply to your work, let me know how it goes, what happens, like what you need, what we can do better. And then, yeah, that's it. I'm not even going to do that.